Welcome back to Big Brave Business. I'm your host, Sarah K. Heater. Big Brave Business is a podcast where we challenge the status quo of traditional business practices. So if you're ready to challenge norms, rewrite the rules, and redefine what it means to lead with courage and integrity, then grab a notebook and let's dive in. Welcome back to Big Brave Business. I am here with a new business bestie today. Emily Aborn is a content copywriter, speaker, and podcast host of Content with Character, and she built this. Since 2014, she's had experience running brick-and-mortar as well as online businesses. She's worked with 100 plus industries as a copywriter, helping her clients increase their visibility and build relationship-based businesses. She brings her clients' personality to life with creative, connected copy and content. For fun, she loves reading, listening to podcasts, and hiking with her husband, Jason, and their dog, Clyde. Welcome to the podcast, Emily.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Sarah. I'm super excited.
Yay. I'm really looking forward to this because a mutual friend introduced us originally. We had a little get to know each other chat a couple of weeks ago. And one of the things you said to me, and so we've talked about networking on this podcast a lot of times because in the fall, I did this challenge where I wanted to do some more networking. So I scheduled over 50 coffee chats in 6 weeks with random people, like random strangers meeting for the first time. Let's just see how it goes. And so I've talked about that on the podcast before, but we've learned a lot, right, about how to have an effective coffee chat and how do you just get to good stuff in 30 minutes. And one of the things that really surprised and excited me in our first meeting is you asked me in that 30-minute coffee chat, what is like an ethical thing? And I don't even remember how you worded it, but what's an ethical challenge or an ethical complication in business that like you're feeling passionately about right now or you're really interested in right now? You can correct me of how you actually worded it.
I think you got it.
And I thought, okay, I like you. This is fun. And also, of course, you need to come on Big Brave Business. So I start there and say, since we talked last time, what business ethic question is on your heart today?
Oh my gosh, way to turn the question right back on me. That's a pro move right there. So I think what I see a lot right now, we're probably both experiencing this in different ways, but I'm seeing a lot of people bumping into the ethical wall of AI. And I know enough to share like where some of the issues are arising. I want to be upfront and say I'm not an expert in like copyright and plagiarism and all the legal stuff, but I'm seeing that a lot. And it's becoming a little bit of a problem in various ways in how people maybe are using AI in ways that they're uninformed about and making ethical decisions that probably are not in the best nature, probably not aligned for their business, let's say, and especially not long-term.
I had a meeting/retreat with someone locally yesterday. We met through NABO, the National Association of Women Business Owners here in Phoenix. And we hung out yesterday for 4 hours talking about my business, her business. It was great. And right early on, when we first sat down, she made a comment kind of offhand to me about AI. And she said, businesses that are making less than $40 million a year shouldn't even be like thinking about using AI. And first of all, I definitely was like, $40 million. And I literally said to her, I don't even know what a $40 million company looks like. That's so mind blowing to me. And she said, of course, that number was really arbitrary, but where she was coming from is if Pepsi or Coca-Cola uses AI, then it's not a big deal because they're already such a huge force that it doesn't really matter if their stuff feels off or if it feels really bland or generic or just like stuff you've already seen before. But if you're making under $40 million a year, you have to be differentiating yourself by being unique and have your own personality and have a brand that sets you apart from what are you doing differently. And if you're using AI for content, then you are not doing anything to set yourself apart or to make yourself unique. You're making yourself actually like very duplicate, like it's something that anybody could do. And so I thought that was so interesting because I can almost guarantee that anybody listening to this podcast is making less than $40 million a year. So and by the way, if you're making more than $40 million a year and you're listening to this, we need to talk. Please get in my DMs. But I was just so intrigued by this. So I don't know. What are your thoughts?
No, that's a really good concept. So I don't think it's like all bad. And I don't think it's even all bad when it comes to creating content and copy. It's just like, how are we using it? And also why? Are we just trying to create more content for content's sake? Because I don't see any value in that. So asking ourselves really why we're using the thing in the first place. But I think you're so right in that we have to set ourselves apart and differentiate ourselves. And part of that is showing our personality, which, not saying that like some of these tools cannot capture our voice, but I personally have not found it to do as good of a job as I have done for my own voice. And it doesn't have the same like warmth and texture and character that it does when I write it. So there's that. But I wanted to talk on something. Oh yeah. Like I think if we're putting something out there that was created by AI and claiming it as our own, like that is a little shisty. So to me, it's just like a sort of disconnect on like being genuine. But again, you can use it as a tool. Like it's really great for things like helping you get started in research, like creating outlines, generating ideas. Like it should be like your buddy, but not replace you. It's like your sidekick, your dirty sidekick. It's like your calculator in school, but not your replacement. So I think I'm with you. I'm watching it unfold, and some of it scares me, and some of it you see out there and you're like, I can tell that the person didn't write that. Like a robot clearly wrote that. It just doesn't have anything. It doesn't have
anything. And I think it was so interesting to me to really, because at first when she said it, I had this kind of knee-jerk reaction internally. I did not say this to her, but I had this kind of internal knee-jerk reaction that I don't know that I agree, because I think I heard also a really good phrase, and I cannot attribute this because I don't remember where I first heard it, which is, we don't need to be afraid of being replaced by robots. We need to be afraid of being replaced by someone who knows how to use a robot, so that it benefits us to know how to leverage AI to do our jobs more effectively and efficiently. However, we aren't trying to use AI to replace humanity. And I think that that's a really interesting distinction. But I think that I had this knee-jerk reaction to her kind of thing about $40 million. Again, first of all, I'm like, 40 million is just such a huge number to me that I'm like, oh my God. And then also I was thinking that we can leverage AI for like idea generation or prompts, or to get our brains working faster, or to make a task quicker. There's so much that could be considered AI even. And again, I'm not an AI expert, so maybe this isn't technically classified as AI, but I feel like it is. Just using copy and paste is like AI, right? You don't have to type it again. Setting filters is AI. So I do podcast editing and production, and my company does editing. And one of the things that we sometimes leverage are filters that we've set, that we created, but like we save the preferences because we know on this account, this filter is going to work really well to improve their sound. And then we can just apply it. We don't have to go in and do those manual adjustments every time. That's AI, right? There are so many things that we can do that it is going to make us more efficient and effective. And I'm not against or opposed to that. It's using AI to literally generate your content. And this does feel very bland. I had my other podcast is for Girl Scout troop leaders. It's called the Troop Leader Experience. And I do send a weekly email to that audience, and I let them know what the new episode kind of is about. I talk about sort of the themes in the episode. I put a link to the episode. And then I also have like an Etsy storefront. So I also just remind people that exists. And the emails are fairly generic, because it's just basically saying, like, hey, I just want you to listen to the podcast if you care about this topic. That's really the whole point of it. And I used AI to help me generate email content because I just didn't have the bandwidth to write it. And it was just the most nothing, like 3 paragraphs that I was like, okay, it's not wrong. It's not bad. It is accurate, but it's also just boring. And I was thinking about what my friend Wendy said with Pepsi or Coca-Cola, you wouldn't care if it was generic and bland because you don't expect it to feel like a person. But if you're still leaning on your personal brand to sell your product, then yeah, I want it to sound like it's from you.
Even with Pepsi and Coke and stuff, like I would say that even they do a really good job of humanizing a brand. Like Target commercials, it feels like a very human brand. So there's also that. I don't know. So I'm with you. I think if you're going to use it as a tool, which again, I do, I use it for like outlines and getting ideas and stuff. If you're going to use it, you have to add your humanness like back into it. If that's the kind of business you're building, if you're just building a straight up informational facts, say it like it is, maybe that's a different story for you. But you are also right. And I think we lump the term AI into just content creation. It's so many other things, right? Like it is the presets on audio or filling in, you're texting somebody and it changes a certain word to ducking, right? That's actually technically AI. So it is making an appearance in other areas of our life. And the way we're referring to it as content creation, I think that we need to be cautious. That's all. So I have there's other things in it I've seen, and I don't know if you've encountered this ever, but so when I mean like taking credit for what it creates, I've seen it happen where somebody is looking for a quote. Okay, so they'll say like, give me 10 quotes that would inspire a woman entrepreneur on a Monday morning. Okay, so that's okay. Thank you for your help. Gives them the 10 quotes. The person I saw do this did not look up to see whether or not those quotes were actually like attributed to somebody else. So if you're going to use it in that way, you have to say, give me 10 quotes and the attributions, and then, or do your legwork and find out if that quote actually belongs to somebody else.
Yeah, I'm going to say do your legwork, because one of the first things that I saw people recommending using Chat GPT-4 was pulling quotes for things. And I can tell you they are almost 100% of the time incorrect. So you can give it a transcript and tell it to pull quotes, and it will pull quotes you never said. You can ask it for quotes about such and such with attributions, and it will give, if you ask for 50, it will give the same one 3 times at different points in the list and attribute it to someone different each time. It doesn't know. It doesn't know what's correct. So it's autofilling. To your point about like autocorrect, it is autofilling what it thinks the highest probability is that will come next. That's what a large language model does, using ChatGPT specifically, but as the example. But yeah, you need to double check quotes. Quotes is like it's not a good idea. And yeah, using a quote and just claiming it as your own. I've seen people do this with jokes too. They'll post a joke, but they just post it as if they came up with it. And it's been said a lot of times before.
I have one for you. So this lady, she's wonderful. She's a great person. Do you remember the Instagram trend that was like the haunted house trend?
No.
Okay. So first of all, I never jump on trend bandwagons. That's just not my thing. But I decided to do this one because I thought of funny things. So basically the trend was you say a haunted house, but... and then you insert your worst nightmare. Okay. So mine was like a haunted house, but my calendar is full of things I have to leave my house to go do. That's my worst nightmare. Anyway, so I'm scrolling on Instagram and I see somebody's haunted house carousel, and it had one of the ones I posted, which was a haunted house, but your calendar is full of events you have to leave your house for. And I commented and I was like, oh my God, that's so funny. I did the exact same thing. Not even thinking, oh, this person copied me. She writes back and says, I stole it from you. And I'm just thinking to myself, like, okay, fine, don't care. That's flattery, right? But also, you should have attributed the idea for the joke to the person that you got the joke from. So this is a huge issue in content creation. Let's put AI completely aside, but copycatting other people. Like when I was in school, I don't know if this was the case for you, but plagiarism, I went to the principal's office once because I had plagiarized something. Like we just had like encyclopedias and they knew like you took that from the encyclopedia. And I sat there. I thought I was going to prison. Like I was like, I'm done. Like this is it. Like it was a huge thing when we were kids and in college. It was like cite every single source. Like They teach you how to do it, right? And people have just forgotten that because the internet is, oh, I just found this here. I just read this here. Same goes with all this stuff we're consuming. Did I read it in a book? Did I hear it in a podcast? I don't know where I got the idea. So if
I just did it earlier. I said I heard somewhere
yes,
that we replace, don't be afraid of being replaced by a robot. Be afraid of being replaced by someone who knows how to use a robot. I didn't come up with that, and I cannot remember where I heard it or read it. So I did exactly what you're talking about.
but no,
But at
but
least I tried to make it clear it's not mine.
no, but you did the right thing. You said, this isn't mine. I don't know where I heard it or saw it. That is the right thing to do. But saying, if you had just said it, and let's just say someone hears it on your podcast, they're like, damn,
Right.
Sarah dropping the gem. And then they quote you saying that. Then the original creator, let's see, sees it and is like, Sarah didn't say that. I said that. So that's the kind of problem that I'm seeing. And I see it like everywhere on social media. But listen to this. I was working for a client recently, and the reason she came to me is because her copy was generic for sure, but the reason she came to me was actually because a competitor had stolen word for exact word what was on her website and used it on his own website. And so I was just like, oh my gosh, that's why we also need to differentiate ourselves, right? I want someone to look at something I've written and be like, oh, that has Emily written all over it. Emily said that.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's really an interesting world. But I think remembering as business owners, if you get an idea or if you think you heard something somewhere and you don't remember where, that's okay. But make sure you say, this isn't my original idea. I just did it on a podcast. I was like, I didn't come up with this, but this is the framework.
And if we're making an aggregate post, like it sounds like that person with the haunted house trend was probably doing, probably all of them were stolen. That one was stolen from you, but that person probably pulled favorites from all these different people who they liked what they were reading. And so they created an aggregate post, then a tribute to all the people you took from. And I think that, and there's a couple of layers to this, but that's the first layer, is make sure that those people that you took it from are tagged. And I see this with some of my favorite kind of carousel posts are a collection of tweets, right?
Yeah,
and so it'll be like a collection of tweets about, and at least that person's name is in, and like little profile picture is in the tweet screenshot most of the time, but it's still like you're just pulling other people's content to create this carousel. And yes, it's a great collection and you maybe cultivated this collection, but it's a really, like, I'm just going to say, in my opinion, it's a lame and like half-assed method of content creation. And I feel like it's interesting because two things. One, legally, you can't just pull other people's posts into an aggregate post, even if you tag them and attribute them, even if you put contact for removal, you can't legally do that. You have to have their permission to use and then cite where you got it from. There's a lot of, I have a couple of kind of business law friends who talk about this kind of stuff a lot online. And I'll put some of my favorite people to follow about legal advice in the description of this episode in the show notes. But also, Instagram specifically came out and said they're deprioritizing in the algorithm aggregate accounts. So if it's a duplicate post that's been posted before and has not been significantly modified to be your own post, then so stitches, of course, would work, or the kind of green screen where you're talking over it, or if you change the audio or whatever, then that is significantly changing. But if it's the exact same post, they will deprioritize it in the algorithm because they are trying to do something about aggregate accounts. And of course I say because they're not saying that aggregate accounts are not allowed. They're not saying they're going to take action against people who are doing illegal and shady things. What they are doing is saying we'll deprioritize them in the algorithm.
Interesting. Yeah, I think those are my favorite too. And I think it's like, I do think if you're going to do that, give the people credit in the comments, tag them in the photos where they deserve the credit.
How easy for that particular example for that person to have reached out to and said, hey, I love this. I'm pulling together some of my favorite responses to this trend. Can I use this and tag you? And you probably would have been like, of course you can. That's awesome. Thanks.
And I think it like makes you look more informed and more of the expert, like when it comes to sharing a framework or something that is like information and facts. For
Yeah.
example, the fact that I know that makes you look like more of an expert is because
Yeah.
my friend Karen Kenny told me. Like it actually makes you look better when you cite your sources because it shows that you're a learner. It shows that you're listening to other people. So I stand by those words. Those are her original words for the attribution. But I really do believe it. Like it makes you look like, oh, this person reads, this person listens to podcasts, this person consumes other
It's so
things.
true. And it builds trust that you're honest, because I think that I have a friend who has run into this on reels that have popped off and gone viral, where she does have a lot of research and sources in the work that she does, but she does not always put them in the reel, right? She puts a reel out in the world to get your attention and to bring you into her world so that you can engage in a more meaningful way, for better or for worse. This is how reels work. And multiple times she has had situations where those reels go viral or mini viral or whatever, and people do end up in the comments saying, I need to see sources for the claims that you're making, right? And the reality is, I know that this person has those sources, but she didn't list them. And it deteriorates trust for some people on the receiving end when they're like, are you just like whipping out statistics? Are you just saying things to say? Is this just to make me have an emotional reaction to come into your world? And the reality in that case is yes, but it is also true. But it would feel more true if you could cite a source.
I 100% agree with you.
Yeah, it's interesting. Interesting. So I think one of the things that, so I also teach at my local university, and plagiarism is such an interesting thing because I work primarily with freshmen and in college, and they sometimes are less prepared than others for doing work at the college level. And there's a particular assignment in the class that I tend to teach most semesters that requires them to go learn about an organization online and report back about this organization. Like, what is their mission? What kind of programs do they offer? What population are they supporting? What geographic area do they serve? Like these kind of things. And most of the time, these organizations that they choose to go research have an about page where this information is just available. And students will often, in this assignment, just go copy and paste from that web page and just put it onto a document and submit it as their own work. And there's lots of ways I can tell when something has been copied and pasted, but I do also try to make it really clear to students before the assignment is due, hey, you can't do that. But I can see how sometimes students get frustrated or feel stuck when they think like, but how am I supposed to say this in an original way? How am I supposed to do a meaningful like redesign of this content? And I think that probably content creators could run into the same thing. So I'm wondering, as someone who helps people with content creation, do you have any like thoughts or insights or recommendations for like, how do we make things feel original?
This might sound bad, but in my head, a lot of times I feel like I can make things better. So that's probably how I do it. Like I'm like, oh, I can always make something better. So I start there. And maybe that's a question actually other people can use too. Like for me, it's probably like my little ego, right? Like I can do this better. But you can use it to your advantage when you're looking at something like, how can I make this better? How can I say it better? Because the truth is, you probably can improve upon it. You can probably take out some of the complexity, some of the jargony language, right? Some of that like industry speak. So maybe start there. Maybe start with that question of like, how can I make this better? And then secondarily, let's just say, how can I make this more me? So how would I say this? Like, I'm not going to use somebody gave the best example the other day of this phrase that ChatGPT likes to assign to her. There's ones like unlock, unleash. Like I
Yep.
wouldn't say those things. So
Yeah.
what is something I would say instead? Oh, wield, WIELD. She said, ChatGPT thinks I wield things a lot. I'm like over here with swords. No, how would I say this instead? I think those are two easy starting places. I don't know if I have any other tip because I usually in my head, like I said, think I can make something better.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because even with my own content, when it comes to trying to repurpose content, I have been trying to take it a step further, basically. And by that, I'll say what it reminded me of. I'll say what it brought up for me. I'll say how it made me feel. I'll say what I've been thinking since. I'll say what I disagree. I'll say what I think other people might disagree in order to challenge it. So those are all ways. And those are also tips that I give students. Fun tip if you have a kid in school and in college, or if you're going back to school for an extra degree or whatever, if you have to do those online discussion board posts, which is just like such a common experience in college in this day and age, those are ways to have a way more meaningfully engaged discussion post than to just say, great point, I loved it. Like instead saying, here's my personal connection to this. Here's like a story this reminds me of. Here's how I'm going to implement this. Here's what I disagree with respectfully, or here's what I think other people might disagree with. All of those things I think are ways to bring it to a point of an original idea. And I'm even trying to do this, and I haven't been very consistent so far, but I'm going to try to get caught up on this. So hopefully by the time this episode comes out, I've got like a bunch of these. But I started on LinkedIn, and I think I'm actually going to move to Substack, but I've been trying to blog about these Big Brave Business podcast episodes. And I don't want to just say, here's all the great stuff Emily and I talked about, because I want you to listen to the episode. So what I actually want to do is take the themes and the content that Emily and I talk about in this episode, and I want to write a blog post about, here's how I've been feeling since we had this conversation. Here's what I've been thinking. Here's how I'm implementing this stuff. Here's how this conversation changed or shaped me, right? This is how I have learned from this conversation, and blog that and then link the conversation, right? So that's the direction I'm trying to go, even with my own content.
Your answer was way better than mine. So good. And no, and true. I love that. Like, how can I make this, how can I make a direct parallel to me, something I've experienced, a challenge that I'm hearing other people have with this particular fact or information? I love that. And then I would also add, when you're doing your Substack and sharing in this way, you get to insert when you didn't agree with something that somebody said. And I think that's really good for setting yourself apart as a thought leader and also an expert in what you do. It reminds me of book reports when we were in school. Yes. That's one thing that did it right. So yeah, sure, you're giving the synopsis of the book, but you also actually have to share your own thoughts and feelings of the book. Right. And there were a lot of times when I'm like, I did not like this book, or like, I loved this book because it reminded me of myself. I think that was a good training ground. I think like what you described, I'm like, oh, it makes me think of book reports, and like, how fun was that? And that's why we love reading books, because they have something to do with us, or they make us think of something else, or we disagree with them, or we agree with them. So There you go. That's beautiful.
Yeah. And I think similar, where I got the tippers, the suggestion for putting stuff you disagree with was also training ground for, here's how you write a research paper, which is that if you're going to take someone else's research, you need to look for what are, in order to support your like hypothesis or your thesis statement, you also have to look for what are the weaknesses in the arguments that are already out there, right? And so you're advocating about either why they are not accurate or why some people are critical. That's really important. To your point about thought leadership, is if somebody's going to make an assertion, it's not enough to just know why they're right. It's also enough to know why somebody might be critical or object to that thought, that idea. And then what is the merit to that criticism, and how can we respond to that criticism and acknowledge that criticism? And I think that is another way. Again, I just feel like, yeah. So I feel like what we're coming around to feels like ethics in content creation really comes back to thought leadership, and AI can't do that for us.
Yeah.
Just sum up our entire half-hour conversation.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And that is really what else differentiates us. It is who we are, and who we are is a combination of our heart, thought, probably our body to some extent, right? But the things that we can share with other people are our heart and our thoughts. And so you're right. Like, how can we pave the way with those things in being different? And sadly, AI can't do that for you.
Yeah. Super interesting. Okay, I love this, and I feel like we could just talk honestly all day. And so I definitely, of course, would love to have you back and we can talk about more ethical complications. But I always love to wrap up these conversations with a fun question. And this can be about work or it can be personal, whatever you want. What is something that's making you happy right now?
Oh, this is a fun question. You know what is making me so happy is the fact that it is like summertime here in New Hampshire, which I live for, and getting to spend more time outside. I love being outside in the summertime. And so I'm fully embracing more time outside.
I love that for you.
Hopefully next time we talk, I'll have a tan.
That would be really fun to be able to compare that on video. Yeah. And it's so funny when I hear people say that, because living in Arizona, it's like the exact opposite. This is the one time of year I'm trying not to go outside, at least not at home. We can drive up into the mountains and then it'll be a lot cooler up there. But
we joke up here, like, we really earn this. Like, we go through like 6 months of winter.
Totally. You did earn it, and you deserve the sunshine. I love that for you. So something that's making me happy right now is I shared on the podcast before, I think, that I had been like reading a little bit less. So I started this year so strong. I was reading like crazy. And then I went through a little bit of a pause in reading, not because I had a reading slump, which is totally normal, by the way, but because I was like obsessively listening to Tortured Poets Department. I was like totally into Taylor Swift's new album, and I realized that I was reading significantly less after that album came out. But anyways, I've been back into reading again, and 2 book shout outs that I want to give that I have recently read. One I'm still currently reading at the time of recording this, but 2 book shout outs that I want to recommend. And I listened to both of these on Audible. I actually do have the physical copy of one of them that I've also read in the past, but I like listening to nonfiction on audiobooks, and I like reading fiction as physical books, generally speaking. So 2 nonfiction recommendations for you. 1, Laziness Does Not Exist by Devin Price. Hands down, far and away, easily the best book I have read this year so far. Absolutely love it. Laziness Does Not Exist. And then another book that I am currently reading, which is the one that I also own the physical copy of, is the Anti-Racist Business Book by Trudy LeBron. So some really good reminders that I needed the refresher, and I am looking forward to the rest of that reread as well. But just 2 really good, like, thought-provoking, impact the way you think, impact the way you approach things, impact the way you think about work and the way you see yourself taking up space in your work. So really exciting. I love reading, and I'm so happy to be back on it. I know you're another reader. And I think that's something that a lot of us in this Big Brave Business community have in common. Now, if you are not a reader, I'm not trying to exclude you. I love you too. And it's totally fine. I am a big reader though. And I think that in some capacity, I want to start a Big Brave Business book club.
Fun.
I think some of these reads that I am really loving, that I think are really like shaping and forming, I would like to put that into some form of a book club. So more details to come. Maybe by the time this episode comes out, I will announce it, have an announcement about it. But yeah, in some shape or form, I want to do a Big Brave Business book club. So if that sounds good to you, tell me that you're in, send me a DM. If you want to connect with me or Emily, of course, all of our information is going to be in the description, in the show notes. Please come and hang out with us in our DMs and tell us what ethical things are bugging you, and also what your thoughts are about AI and content creation. We totally want to chat with you about it. Thank you so much for being here, Emily. I appreciate you so much.
Thanks for having me. This was a lot of fun.
And you'll be back for sure.
I will be back.